What's up guys, this is Voxside and welcome to another After Effects tutorial. I will be covering a lot of different techniques in this one, so let's get started right away. Let's create a new composition and let's name this Circle HUD. And it's very important that you make this the width and height of the composition to be equal, so I'll just use 1500 by 1500. 2 frames should be fine, duration is completely up to you, and I'll hit OK. And let's go ahead and just create a new solid layer, right? So that's Control Y. And right away I'm gonna switch the mask tool to be the ellipse tool, and go ahead and double click this, and this will add a perfect circle mask to our layer. So now we can start building up our element. And I only really need to model a quarter of this portion. So this portion right over here is the only thing I'm really concerned about, because everything else will get mirrored over. And let me show you the workflow for that. So I will actually pre-compose this layer. So that's Ctrl-Shift-C on your keyboard. And I will name this composition to quarter, right? You can name it whatever you want. And hit OK. And I will step inside this new composition. So double click to access this. And I'm gonna go to composition settings, and I'm gonna split the width and height value for this comp. So this divided by 2 will leave me with a value of 750, and do the same for height, so 750. Leave the duration as it was and hit OK. And I'm gonna go ahead and grab this solid, and while holding Ctrl and Shift, I will reposition this until it snaps right here in the corner. And what we've essentially done is just create this nice circle quarter. And I will step inside my circle HUD comp, and I will reposition this to the corner as well. So as you're moving this, hold Ctrl and Shift, and you can see it snaps to center. And what I can do now is go ahead and add an effect, stylize motion tile. Let's turn on mirror edges, and I will set the output width and height to 300 and 300. And you can see this will mirror it over. And if I lock this composition, so press this toggle viewer lock, and let's go ahead and make a new comp viewer and step inside my quarter composition. And now whatever changes I make here will get mirrored over to the other side. And let's take a look and see what we can create now. So I'll go ahead inside the mask properties, and I will decrease the expansion a bit, and you can see it updating here. So let's maybe decrease the expansion. Let's create a duplicate of this mask, so Ctrl D, and I will set the second mask to subtract. Go inside its settings, and let's decrease the value even more, so we're creating essentially this nice stroke effect. And maybe something like this should be fine. And I'm gonna go ahead and switch to my rectangle tool for my mask options, and just draw a rectangle maybe around this place. And you can see if I have my layer selected, this creates a new mask. So I will set this new mask to intersect, or rather subtract, as you can see. So you can see we're already starting to create some interesting shapes. And I will go ahead and duplicate this layer, so Ctrl D, hit M for my masks, and delete the last one. And for my first mask, I will step inside the options and decrease the expansion for this. Alright, and if I go back in my first layer, so the one with the 3 masks, I can select my third mask, and let's organize things up a bit so we have more room to work with. Alright, and I can go ahead, and if I select my pen tool, so that's G, I can go ahead and add another anchor point for this rectangle mask. And now I can even have more control over the look of this mask. And I'm just sort of trying to create a more interesting shape. And you can see it updating in the main circle comp. So you can see a really super easy way to create some interesting shapes just by mirroring over a quarter of your composition. Now I will go ahead and duplicate our second solid layer, so Ctrl D, and I'll just decrease the scale for this layer, and maybe go in my mask properties, and for my first mask I will decrease the expansion even more, so we're creating sort of a thinner line. and maybe readjust the scale again. And I'll go back to my first solid layer and readjust this rectangle mask a bit. So I want this part over here to be a little larger. Alright, let's go ahead and try to create a new shape. So with my last layer created, I will just go ahead and duplicate it. And I'll go ahead and rescale this layer. So make it a little bit smaller. And let's go to our mask settings. And for my second mask, I will maybe decrease the expansion even more. And let's go ahead and do the same thing that we did with the first layer. And I'll go ahead and add another rectangle mask to this. Set it to subtract. And now I can press G for my pen tool and add another anchor point. And now I can control this shape like we did it with the first one. So I can check out here the result. And maybe for my second mask, decrease the expansion even more. And this should be fine. And I'll go ahead and duplicate this layer, press M for my mask, and delete the last mask with the rectangle that we've created. And for the second mask, I will decrease the expansion, and we're sort of creating this nice shape that you can see in the main comp. And what I want to do now is grab my last two layers, and I will actually pre-compose these, so Ctrl-Shift-C. And let's go ahead and add an effect, stylize, fine edges. And if I set the edges to invert, you can see sort of the effect we're getting in the main comp. Alright, let's head back in our quarter comp. And I want to add another shape to maybe fill out this hole over here at the top. So let's grab my last circle mask, and I will duplicate this and rescale this. And here you can see that our shape that we've just created is sort of being layered on top of everything else, and we can fix this by setting this pre-comp to screen. And now you can see our shape below it is being revealed. So I'll go ahead inside this duplicate that we've just created, press M for my masks, and let's adjust the expansion for these guys a bit and try to fill out this hole properly. And let's maybe even increase the expansion on this side. And this will be fine, and we will go ahead and do the same thing. I'll just create a new shape. So with my pen tool selected, I'll go ahead and start drawing a shape which I can then use as a cutout for the other masks. So I will set this new mask to subtract, or actually I will have to set this to intersect. Alright, so now I'm filtering out just a small piece of our circle mask, and maybe I'll adjust the shape. I'll go ahead and duplicate this layer now, press M for my masks, and for my third mask I will adjust this rectangular shape. I'll go ahead in my first mask and just decrease the expansion to create this nice edge. And let's take a look in our main comp. Alright, this is looking fine. Let's see what else we can do. And I will pre-compose both of these layers that are creating this shape at the top, so Ctrl-Shift-C. And I will actually just set the opacity for this guy to be 50%. And let's try to find our edge layer. So this guy, and I will go ahead and duplicate this guy and rescale this guy again. And maybe for this guy I will press M for my masks and go to my second mask and maybe make this guy a little thinner. So decrease the expansion for this guy. And while I'm at it, I'm gonna go ahead and duplicate this guy again. Press S for scale and rescale this guy maybe towards the center somewhere. And maybe increase the expansion for this guy, so press M and increase the expansion a bit. Give it a little thicker edge. Let's go ahead and duplicate this guy again. Rescale this, so I will just scale this up a bit. And for my masks, I will go ahead and increase the expansion. Or rather, go in my first mask and let's increase the expansion here. And I'll go ahead and do the same thing. I'll just drop another rectangle mask for this layer. Not really worried too much about how the rectangle will look because I'm gonna edit this. And let's set this to subtract. Let's add another point, so press G for your pen tool. And I'm switching to my regular selection tool, so that's V, whenever I'm repositioning the anchor points. And I'm sort of trying to recreate the initial effect that we did with the first layer. And let's duplicate this layer, so Ctrl D, and get rid of the third mask on this second duplicate. And for my first mask, I will maybe decrease the expansion, and now you can see the effect we're getting. And let's go back in our first layer and readjust the rectangle maybe a bit more, and just create these nice edges. And now the next step will be to create some arrows. And I'll go ahead and grab my second layer, which is this edge over here, and I will duplicate this, and let's set this on top and rescale this. And let's unsolo these layers, and let's rescale this even more. Let's go to my mask settings, and let's see, for my first mask I will increase the expansion until it meets with this other edge. And maybe go to my second mask and decrease the expansion for this guy. Let's go ahead and add another mask to this. So press G and let's go ahead and add another mask to this. And set this mask to intersect. And this will be the base for our arrow. And now I'll go ahead and just create a new layer. So that's Ctrl Y. And I will hide this layer for now. And while having the layer selected, I'll press G and sort of try to shape out a nice triangle here. And unhide this. And you can kind of see how the shape looks here. So I will need to readjust this triangle a bit. And now for this layer, I will press M. Duplicate this mask. Set the second mask to subtract. And let's go ahead and increase, or rather decrease, the expansion. And maybe readjust this spline a bit. Sorry, the second mask. And there we have our arrow now. And I will go ahead and pre-compose these layers and just name this to arrow 1. So now with this arrow layer, I can duplicate this. And I will go ahead and go to rotation, so that's R. And I will set the rotation to -90 degrees. And let's go ahead and press S for scale. I will turn off uniform scaling. And I will set the first value to -100. And you can see this flips it over and aligns it perfectly to the other corner. And now we've successfully created the arrows. So that's pretty much it for our quarter comp. And I can go ahead and just close this and unlock this comp. Let's go inside our circle HUD. And let's go ahead and connect these center edges with our outer edges through a line. And I'll go ahead and grab my pen tool. And I'm not having any layer selected, and this will create a new shape layer. So I'll go ahead and start my line right at the center of my arrow point. So I will click to create a new shape layer. And now I can go ahead and, while having shift selected, I will make another point. And this will just create a new straight line if you have shift selected. Alright, and let's go ahead in our properties here, and maybe for my shape, I don't need any fill for this. And for our stroke, I will set the width to maybe be a little thicker, so 1.5. And I'll go ahead and enable dashes for this, so hit this plus sign to create dashes. And maybe for my dash, I want to create smaller dashes, so I'll just set this to a value of 5. And I want to add a little bit more detail to this line, so I'll go ahead and switch this to my ellipse tool and double click this ellipse tool to create a new shape layer. And let's go in the ellipse settings, and for path I will set the size to be maybe 10. And let's see if this is big enough. So this should be alright for now. Let's go ahead and get rid of the stroke, so I don't need stroke for this. And I will move this over until it reaches the line. And by the way, I'm holding shift while moving this upward, and this will just ensure that it's moving in a straight vertical line. Alright, so hold shift while repositioning. And I'll go ahead and press P for position, set a keyframe for the position where it's at right now, move over to frame 30 maybe, and I'll just drag this over to the top. So I'm holding shift while doing this. So just drag it over until it meets the arrow point. And this just creates a nice animation from bottom to top. And I'll actually go ahead and select this layer and press U twice and set the size to be maybe 6. So I don't really want it as big, or maybe 8. Alright, and let's add an expression to this position now. So hold Alt and left click this stopwatch. And the expression I'm going to use is going to be loop out. So that's loop out with a capital O. Make sure that the O here is capitalized. And I will open and end parentheses. And in between the parentheses, I will type ping pong. And this ping pong I will place in between quotes. So make sure that you have your quotes. So here's how the expression goes. So it's loop out with a capital O, open bracket, quote, ping pong, end quote, and end bracket, right? And this will loop between our keyframes back and forth and create this nice oscillating animation. And I will go ahead and duplicate this layer, press P for position, and for this layer I will just switch these keyframes around. So now you can see the result. And I will go ahead and grab all of these layers, pre-compose them, so Ctrl Shift C, and let's name this to line pre-comp. And I'll go ahead and make 4 duplicates of this, so Ctrl D, and let's set each one to have a 90 degrees rotation between them. So 90 degrees, so this guy is going to be 180 and 170. And let's go ahead and I will add a adjustment layer. And I want to rotate the portion from the arrows to the inner edges. And I will go ahead and add for this adjustment layer a distort transform. And if I change the rotation, you can see I'm sort of rotating everything, and that's not the result I want. So what I can do with this adjustment layer is I can double click to add a mask to it, and I will double click the mask, grab any of the corners, and as I drag this down, I'm gonna hold Ctrl and Shift, and this will scale uniformly, and just drag it until it matches up with our arrow edges. So somewhere around this place. And now if I use the rotation value, you can see I'm only affecting the portion that I want. So I can go ahead and let's set this back to 0, and I will add a simple time expression to this rotation. So Alt and left click your stopwatch, type in time multiplied by, let's try a value of 25. Let's preview this real fast. Alright, so I think that looks good, and we can move forward with the next step. I will go ahead and double click this ellipse tool to create a new shape layer, and for the ellipse here I will go to my path and decrease the scale, get rid of the fill, we won't be needing this, and maybe this will do for now. Let's go in our stroke and enable dashes for this, and let's set the dash value to a value of 5 just to maintain consistency. And I think this will be fine. I'll go ahead and add another ellipse shape. Let's get rid of the stroke and decrease the scale. And maybe try the same value of 8. And here's what I want to do with this guy. So let's step inside my transform options for the ellipse. So this is the transform properties for the shape. So not the actual layer transform. So don't confuse these two. Let's go in our transform ellipse 1 properties, and let's go to position, and I'll just drag the second position until it meets with our edge that we've just created. So something like this should be fine. And now if I go to my layer and go to the layer transform properties, so not this guy, the layer transform properties, I can go to rotation, and if I increase the rotation, you can see what kind of animation we can create. And I'll just go ahead and add another time expression to the rotation, so time multiplied by, let's try a value of 50, and let's preview this real fast. Alright, so I think the speed for this circle is alright. And now I can go ahead and pre-compose both of these layers. So this will be my rotating, I don't know, circle. And let's go back to the beginning of the timeline. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer now. And I'm going to go to scale, and I'm going to subtract maybe a value of 15 from the scale, and this will give me 85. Let's duplicate this again, and this will be 70. Duplicate again, this will be 55, and this should be alright. And I will grab all these 4 layers now and pre-compose them together. So rotating pre-comp, and maybe rescale this guy just so it fits right between the inner and outer edges. So something like this. And let's go inside this rotating pre-comp. And for my first layer, I'll go ahead and add a distort, transform, turn off uniform scale, and for my scale width, I'll set this to -100, and this will just flip this layer over. And if I scroll my timeline, you can see it's going the other way as the other two, and this will just create some variation. And I will go ahead and duplicate this transform layer to my third layer, and let's preview this. So you can see I'm just kind of creating this variation. And let's step inside the rotating circle for a second. And I actually want to grab this second layer and duplicate this guy. And if I go in my rotation, so press R, and let's go inside our expression here, and I will add to this expression plus 180. And this will just create another shape that starts from the other side and just add a little bit more detail. So let's go back inside our rotating comp, and you can kind of see the effect here. And I'm just gonna go through these layers and just try to switch the rotation a bit and create a little bit of variety. Alright, so that's pretty much it for our rotating comp. Let's go back inside our circle HUD. And let's see how we can create these nice rotating shapes towards the center here. And this will probably be the hardest part of the tutorial, because I'm gonna be using quite a bit of expressions, but don't worry, it's super easy and it's really nothing that advanced. So let's just create a new shape layer. So double click this to create a new ellipse tool. I'll go ahead and scale this down. And I will get rid of the fill, so I won't be needing that. And let's go inside our stroke, and let's increase this width value. And let's go ahead and go to add, and I will select trim paths. And for my trim path properties, you can see as I change the end and the starting values, we're kind of creating the shapes from the original example. So here's what I want to do. Each time I'm gonna be duplicating this layer, I want to generate a new random value for the start and end values for this trim path, right? So to do this, you will need to add an expression. So alt click your stopwatch to add expression, and the expression is gonna be random. And in between parentheses, I can choose the numbers that I want the number to be random from. So for example, if I'm gonna go with a value of 0, 100, it's just gonna choose a random number from 0 to 100, right? So that's pretty easy. But if I scroll my timeline, you can see that this number changes with every frame, and we don't want that. We want to generate a number, and I want to keep the number for the whole duration of the composition. And to do this, we just need to give this random a seed random. So before the random, Let's just press enter, and for my first line of code I will just type seed random, and that's random with capital R, so this is very important. And in between parentheses I will type 1 comma true. So this true after the 1 is what's actually gonna hold this random generated value throughout the whole timeline. And as you can see now, it's no longer changing with every frame. And this one over here, so the first value from the seed random, it's just a random value that you can change. So it doesn't really matter. You can, if you want to generate a different random value, you can just type whatever value here. So if I use a value of 5, you can see this just generates a new value, but it's still kept throughout the whole composition. So I'm usually going with 1 here, but you can use whatever number you want. What's important is the true that comes after the 1. So that's pretty much how you can generate a random value. So each time I duplicate this layer now, you can see if I go in my properties that the start property for the trim paths has a different value with each duplicate. So I'll go ahead and delete these duplicates, and I want to do the same for my end position. So I'll go ahead and type seed random 1 comma true between parentheses, and I'll just type random, and here I can choose the range for my value, and I'll just type, and let's actually go with not such high values. So maybe I want the smallest value to be 15, and I want the highest value to be 50. And I'll just copy this to my original start value. Alright, and now if I duplicate this layer, you can see we are generating all sorts of different shapes and sizes. So let's delete these duplicates. So each time I duplicate this layer, I also want to affect the size of the ellipse path, and I will go ahead and decrease this until it matches with the inner edges. And now each time I duplicate this layer, I want to add a random value to the size between, let's say, maybe 0 and 350. So let's see how this will look in expression terms. So let's go ahead and add an expression, and let's create some space here. So this value right here is called value, right? Meaning in this case 414. And I will leave this as it is. And before the value takes place, I want to generate a random number. So let's go ahead and type our random expression. So seed random 1 comma true. And for our random number, I want this to be any value between 0 and, let's say, 350. Alright, so now I'm generating a random number. So how can we add this randomly generated number now to our value? Well, that's really easy. You can just set this random up to be a variable, and to do this I'll just type x equals to random. And now I can use this x value anywhere I want in the expression, right? So for example, now if I type plus x, and let's see now how the expression will take place. You can see we're not getting a uniforming scaling effect, and you can see that only our first value from this size property is being affected. And to change this, we need to apply this x value to both values of the scale. And we can do this by placing our x in between brackets, and I will type x comma x. So now our value is applied to the first property and the second one as well. So this essentially means that this x value will affect the x scale and the y scale as well. So now if I take a look, you can see that this is now scaling uniformly. And if I duplicate this layer, you can see we're getting all sorts of different scaling. So let's undo this. And I'll just go ahead and change this higher value to maybe 250. So I don't want it scaling that big. And let's go ahead to our stroke properties, and I want to add another random expression to our width. So I want to generate a random number for the width as well. So let's type our expression seed random 1 true, and I want to use a value between, let's say, maybe 5 and maybe 45, and duplicate this again, and you can see now its effect. Let's go back, and I also want to affect the opacity property for this layer, so I'll just go ahead and copy this expression, press T for opacity, and now just paste my expression. And for my random properties here, I maybe want a value, any value between maybe 15 and 75. Go ahead and make some duplicates. So now you can kind of see we are getting the original look. And now one last thing I will need to add is a rotation animation. So if I press R, I can go ahead and add an expression to this. So I can type in time multiplied by 100, let's say. And let's solo this for now. And you can see this just adds a normal animation. But let's say that each time I duplicate this layer, I want every layer to have a sort of like a different speed and maybe even a different direction. So in order to do this, let's delete these layers. I will use again the random expression. So let's create some space here, and before the time takes place, I will just set up a random expression. So seed random 1 and true. And for my random number, I want to generate any value between, let's say, maybe negative 15. So this will mean that some layers might go in the opposite direction, and the higher value will be 50, right? And I will set this random to be a variable, so x equals. And this doesn't have to be x. You can use any letter you want. You can even use a full word. So maybe I can say my number, something like this, but I'm just using x because it's a lot easier this way. So now I can just multiply my time value with x, and now as I duplicate this layer, we are creating all sorts of rotation. And I also want these layers to start from a different rotation value, so let's delete these. So I can set another variable, and let's use y for this, and I will set y to be random, and I will use any value between 0 and 306. So I will add this value to our time expression. So this is plus y, and this will just take the original time expression that we had and will add a value between 0 and 360 degrees. And now you can see as I duplicate this, every layer is starting from a different rotation value. And now we're creating this very nice detailed effect. So now I can unsolo these, and I can go ahead and make a bunch more duplicates. And you can see how very easily we can add a lot of detail to our shape. So you can go ahead and duplicate this as many times as you want. And I'll just grab all of these layers and pre-compose them, and let's name these shapes pre-comp. And you can see the seed changes because the number of layer change. And let's go back in our circle HUD, and I'll just press T for opacity and make this maybe 50% or maybe 65. So now one final thing left to do here is I will make a new layer. So that's Ctrl Y, hit OK. Let's make a circle mask, and I'll go ahead and set this mask to be maybe 50% opacity, and grab this mask and scale it down. Go to my mask, so M, duplicate the mask, set this mask to subtract, and for my second mask I will just increase the feather. And I'll go ahead and for this layer I want to add a generate cell pattern. And for the cell pattern I will set the disperse to be 0. And for the size, maybe let's try a value of 6. And this will just give it a nice texture for our solid. And maybe increase the size to 8. And let's unsolo this. And I'll just use this layer to create a nice pulsating effect from the center. So I'll make a keyframe at frame 30 for the scale at where it's at. Go to frame 0. And scale this down until it meets with the inner edges. And I'll go ahead and press T for opacity and also animate the opacity from maybe 100%. Go back to frame 30 and set another keyframe for 0. And if I press U to show my keyframe information, you can see this is the result. And to repeat these keyframes, you can go ahead and just add a simple expression. So that's loop out with capital O. And in between parentheses, I will type quote, cycle, end quote. And this will take these keyframes and just repeat them. And just copy this expression to our opacity. And now you can see we're very easily creating this nice pulsating effect. And I don't want this layer to be shown right here in the center, so I'll just go ahead and make a new layer and add a circle mask to it. And let's decrease the expansion for this until it reaches our inner edges. And now if I set my initial layer to be Luma inverted matte for this second layer, now you can see it's using this mask layer that we've created to sort of cut out the middle portion towards the center here, because I want this to be empty. So this is pretty much it to how you can create this nice circle HUD element. And now all you have to do is just simply create a new composition, and I'll make this full HD. And I'll just drag this circle HUD that we've created inside the main comp. And I'll just scale this down to maybe, let's try a 40%. Drag this over, duplicate this a few times. Let's grab all of these and let's scale them down to maybe 35. And let's add a rectangle shape. And for my rectangle, let's get rid of the fill and readjust the size here and try to sort of create these bounds for our circles. Maybe set the stroke width to maybe 2. And I can go ahead and add another rectangle mask, maybe somewhere around this part towards the middle portion, and duplicate this rectangle and drag it over to the bottom portion as well. Alright, and let's go ahead and add a background, so Ctrl Y for a new solid. Let's use a ramp. Let's choose a nice blue, maybe desaturated. And let's place this background below our objects. And here you can see we're having these black spots, and you can get rid of those by simply setting our circle HUDs to screen. Let's duplicate this background layer, and I'll get rid of the ramp and go ahead to generate, and I'll add a grid to this, and I'll set the border to maybe a value of 2, and reshape this grid a bit, and also add a noise, fractal noise effect, and I'll set the fractal noise to be linear and set the complexity to maybe 2, and this will just break up our grid a bit and just create a more detailed look. And I'll set the background to be screen as well. And I'll duplicate my initial shape layer with the border here. So Control D this guy. And I'll place this above our grid. And I'm actually gonna rename this layer to grid. And now with this guy, I want to add a fill to this. And I'll set the fill to be white. And I'll set the grid to be Luma inverted matte. So I don't need the grid to be affecting this portion here with the circles. And now I can go ahead and make all of these layers 3D. And let's add a camera. And I'm using a angle view of 75 degrees. Hit OK. And let's use my camera orbit tool, so that's C. You can switch between your tools just by pressing C. And let's go ahead and create a nice angle. So something like this. And now if I go to my background layer, I can rescale this until it fits the whole screen. And I can go ahead to my grid layer and I can go ahead and add a stylize motion tile. and just increase the output width and height just so it fills out the entire screen. And to add a bit of animation to the camera, I can go ahead and add a new null layer, and I won't be making this a 3D layer. I'll just parent the camera to the null, and if I go to my position settings, you can see I can adjust the position now for this camera, and it's a lot easier to create a fixed camera animation this way. So I'll just make a keyframe for the position at the start of our timeline, maybe move it over to the side, and let's go to our last frame and make another keyframe. So this just creates a nice simple camera animation. And a couple of final things that I've done in the original example. I just added a lens blur to create this nice fake depth of field. And I just created this nice highlight for the front to just offset the darkness in the background. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you follow the download link in the description of this video, you can go ahead and download the project file and check them out if you got stuck anywhere. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a like if you learned anything new. Subscribe and stay tuned for more tutorials. And I'm out.